Good afternoon, I guess I should say, to everyone. We've got a fantastic panel here to discuss advanced technologies for grid decarbonisation. So I'm going to quickly introduce you to everyone and then pass to you for some sort of opening comments. So starting on the left here, we've got Michael Terrell, who's the Senior Director for Climate Ops at Google, which if you've read Ministry of the Future sounds like quite an exciting dark ops type job. But we'll find out what you really do in a moment. Then we've got Michelle Patron, I'm just going through my list here, Senior Director for Global Sustainability Policy at Microsoft. Tim Latinov, the CEO of Fervo Energy, and then Avi Zevin, who's the Deputy General Counsel of the US DOE. So that's our panel. So what a fantastic lineup. So starting over with you, Michael. So in 2020, Google set the goal for 24/7 decarbonised electricity. So could you just start by telling us why you set that goal and some of the challenges that you've faced, and also what role you think advanced clean technology has in achieving that goal?
Absolutely. Thanks, Katherine, and thanks for having me.
Everybody can hear me okay? There we go. So Google set the goal to be 24/7 carbon-free energy because we had done renewable energy purchasing at scale for nearly a decade. We had matched our annual electricity consumption with renewable energy purchases, but we knew that when we achieved that goal that we weren't done, that the ultimate goal that we're all aiming for is round-the-clock clean energy everywhere at all times. And as we oriented ourselves towards that ambitious goal, we did some modeling of our portfolio, cost modeling, scenario planning, and what we found was we were not going to be able to meet our 24/7 goal. And by the way, the grids where we operate, we're not going to be able to meet that goal either without having access to advanced energy technologies beyond wind, solar, and lithium-ion storage. And not only that, we found that not only would we need these technologies, but actually having these technologies would do three things. They would first save us money, actually 40% on our cost of achieving this goal. Secondly, they would help us manage our risk, for example, shape risk that comes with heavy PPAs in one particular technology. And lastly, they would help us solve for regions, particularly in APAC, that are particularly challenging from a wind and solar standpoint. So that's how we ended up in this place in this journey. I think it's an incredibly exciting time, and hopefully we'll talk a little bit more about this in the panel today for these kinds of technologies and taking them to scale. And we're super excited about the future.
Brilliant, thank you. And Michelle, I think Microsoft also has some pretty ambitious goals here. So, 100%, I think of your facilities are supposed to be 100% of zero carbon time match by 2030. Is that right? So, I'd love to hear how you're going to do this, because this is a pretty big challenge.
Exactly. So thank you very much. We're excited to be on this panel. So, like Google, Microsoft, first started with a target to match our energy consumption with 100% renewable energy, and I'm happy to report we're very close. We're on track to meet that goal. And in fact, to date, we have purchased 19 gigawatts have 19 gigawatts of renewable capacity in contract, and that's equivalent to 10 Hoover dams. And so for Microsoft, obviously we need to continue, and so we've set a vision to get 100% of our electricity 100% of the time from zero carbon sources. And a few things I want to share. One is that as we are continuing in this journey, realizing as electricity demand continues to grow, and we face the urgency to make sure that all of that is done through carbon-free, that it really is going to take a multi-technology approach. So alongside continuing to expand solar and wind, that the world is going to need to have a whole toolkit at its disposal with other carbon-free technologies. That includes other carbon-free technologies, geothermal, storage, additional transmission, advanced nuclear and fusion. And when we think about the levers that corporates have, it's very exciting. And you have the lever of procurement to be able to do that. And that's what we've been doing with renewable energy, and we also have done that with geothermal. We have a 50 megawatt project that we just contracted on geothermal. So that's very exciting. We're doing that with storage as well. Using investment, we have $1 billion innovation fund, where about $700 million of that has been deployed around 50 projects, and those also include different types of carbon-free electricity. One that's super exciting is on Line Vision, which is using AI to look at how do you kind of increase the flow on transmission. And in fact, I think that there's a UK utility that's been using that as helping them bring 600 megawatts of additional renewable online, and also through AI, and obviously policy. And so, those are the different levers that we have, with our North Star being 100, 100, 0.
Great, thanks. Well, so much to come back to then. And then Tim, you're from Fervo Energy, and I was pretty excited to see that you've now done the first well tests. We're showing that it can be commercially deployed. So can you tell us a bit more about, what's happening on the geothermal side and the challenges that you found in kind of getting this, to fruition? Because not every startup, as you were telling me earlier, manages to make it to break ground. So can you explain a little bit how you got here?
Absolutely, yeah. So Fervo Energy, we're an enhanced geothermal systems developer, and that really means, geothermal is a technology that's been around for a long time, but it has always struggled to move beyond places that just have the absolute perfect geology for geothermal. So it's great when you're in Northern California or Kenya or Iceland, but as you move into areas that just don't have the right geology, historically it hasn't been able to scale. So around the world today, it's less than 1% of the global energy mix. But the original insight we had to found Fervo was that if the challenge is drilling costs, well, the last decade, drilling costs have changed substantially. So in the United States, we've undergone this shale revolution that has made the U.S. the largest oil and gas producer in the world. But through that, the technology around drilling has really increased by about a factor of 10 in terms of its productivity. And so we had the insight that what if you could adopt some of those technologies? The key one for us was deploying horizontal drilling technology for the first time ever in geothermal. Could you go to areas where you had to drill deeper or wasn't necessarily as high productivity or high flow rate and still make the projects economic? And if you could do that, could you change it from an energy resource that was a rounding error in terms of the global energy mix to something that's really meaningful? And so that was the origin of the idea of Fervo, is doing an enhanced geothermal system incorporating advanced drilling through horizontal drilling. And the journey to get there, to what we were able to announce this week with Google, was successful electricity production online of our first ever commercial pilot project, was quite interesting. And I think since we're talking about accelerating clean energy technologies here, I'll just provide a few anecdotes about our role, Google's role in us taking off, because in order to get a technology to market, you have to attract the funding to do it. In order to attract the funding to do it, you have to prove that you have a product that customers are willing to buy. And so we started the company back in 2018. And at the time, even the concept of 24/7 carbon-free energy wasn't really well talked about. And so as a result, every time we go talk to investors, they'd say, well, you've got to be cheaper than solar, because solar is super cheap now. So if you can't be cheaper than solar, you don't have a business. And that was a constant theme. Probably 9 out of every 10 investors we talked to said that. Interestingly enough, this was the same year that Google hit their 100% renewable energy target and announced that 24/7 carbon-free goal. And so if you read the memo that they rolled out, they articulate what Michael already said so well here, which is that clearly solar, wind, and batteries are going to be the workhorses of a decarbonized grid, but we need a few more technologies there to play that complementary role. And Google specifically called out that geothermal was one of those key technologies. And so we were raising a seed round at the time, and we had almost no other data that anybody in the market who bought electricity would care about geothermal. So this little 5-page publicly available white paper from Google ended up in our data room that we would send to investors. It would say, see, Google cares about this. And that actually made a meaningful difference in our ability to attract investment to get off the ground for that very early sort of desktop study pre-feed phase. And then, of course, as we progressed with Google, that went from a publicly available white paper to a bilateral LOI between us to, in 2021, we executed this geothermal energy development accelerator agreement. And of course, you can see the results today of a producing project using this novel technology.
That's great. So we'll come to the demand side in a bit more detail in a moment. But Avi, let me give the floor to you first, because I know that you guys at the DOE, you've been placing some pretty big bets on accelerating the commercialization of nascent clean technology. And I'd commend the liftoff reports to anyone that hasn't read them. They're good reads. So could you tell us a little bit more about how you're trying to advance these goals, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously the electric sector is the foundation for decarbonizing the entire economy, and we have a lot of really important technologies that are scalable and being deployed now, wind, solar, lithium ion, but those are not going to be sufficient. So as Michael and Michelle and Tim have said. So at DOE we are playing in the entire innovation to deployment continuum, and so we have programs and policies to address that, to scale up technology and to deploy it, and that's really been accelerated by the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law over the last few years, which provided billions of dollars for additional support. So we think about that, breaking that up into a few different places. First, in terms of having to continue to innovate and drive down the cost of these innovative technologies, our Undersecretary of Science and Innovation, where we do a lot of the R&D and early stage development, has put out a number of what we call energy earth shots, which are ambitious but achievable goals for driving down the cost of these nascent energy technologies. So we have energy earth shots for hydrogen, like $1 per kilogram by 2030. We have energy earth shots for long duration energy storage, for enhanced geothermal, etc., floating offshore wind, and those are intended to help use the R&D portfolio to drive down these costs and make them more accessible to companies like Microsoft and Google to purchase. With the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law, we also received substantial additional appropriations for large-scale demonstration programs. So these are intended to bring first-of-a-kind new technologies, demonstrate them very large scale, so that they are demonstrated to the marketplace and can attract investment. And in that context, we have recently announced the selection of 7 hydrogen hubs, each of about $1 billion, $7 billion total, to help scale the hydrogen industry. Similarly, some large-scale advanced nuclear demonstration projects and long-duration energy storage. From there, you get to financing. So, we need to finance and be a bridge to bankability for these technologies. And we have our loan programs office, which is able to provide low-cost financing to advanced energy technologies, among other types of financing. But, the marquee program is this, what we call Title 17 program, which is primarily for advanced energy technologies, where you need to show innovation. And then ultimately, you get to deployment, where, we need to actually scale the deployment of technologies as they move along the continuum. And the Inflation Reduction Act really put the thumb on the scale for that as well, particularly through the clean energy tax credits, which historically in particular have been the investment tax credit, a production tax credit, have been technology specific for wind or solar, and a few key innovations in the IRA that are we see as really helping to scale these advanced energy technologies, including that starting in 2025, both the production tax credit and the investment tax credit will become technology neutral. So any technology that can meet those life cycle, low life cycle or zero life cycle emissions will be eligible for the tax credit. In addition, credit monetization options so that it's not just wind and solar through the tax equity market that can get deployed, but also able to have direct pay for certain utilities or buyers that may not have been able to access the credits, like in the U.S., our public powers utilities, and also transferability for the developers to be able to sell their credits to buyers with tax appetite. And this is a place where I think large companies, like I don't know what you all are thinking about for transferability, but large companies with tax appetite can also come into play. So those are a few of the policies across the continuum, and we have these liftoff reports that you mentioned that sort of identify the big opportunities for these advanced technologies, and then some of the challenges that we're going to need to continue to break down.
Great, thanks. Well, let's spend a bit of time on the demand side now. And Michael, I think companies like Google and Microsoft, you've done a tremendous job, I think, in getting solar and wind to scale, or been a big part of that journey. And I guess I sort of wonder, there's a school of thought that says we just need to do more of that. And I wonder if you could say a little bit more about, what you think the case is for really focusing on the advanced technologies right now.
Great question. It reminds me of where we were, 15 years ago, sort of at the dawn of wind and solar really starting to take off. And they had not been deployed at great scale from the corporate PPA standpoint. They were still relatively expensive. We did a project that involved mirrors in the desert as recently as 2010. So we weren't even sure exactly which types of the technologies we're going to scale. But we felt that we wanted to make a bet and really help to drive things forward, and sign some early PPAs, and other companies did as well. Now we're in a similar place now, and I think it's a super exciting time. As Tim mentioned, we have a project that we did that is generating megawatts of power now, and I think that's incredibly exciting, and it speaks to the incredible progress that we've made and the opportunity that's before us. In terms of how do we, get more involved to get these technologies to scale, I would sort of maybe give 3 examples of ways that we could do that. The first would be companies like us and Microsoft and other off-takers. You need to be a little bit more creative in the early days. You can't just sign a traditional corporate PPA. You may have to have, project equity or prepayments or development agreements or other creative structures that help to address some of the risk and the expense that's associated with early stage projects. The second thing that I think we all need to be thinking about is how do we better value these technologies? A lot of these technologies are always-on technologies or peaker technologies that actually deliver tremendous value to the grid and to customers, and they're not adequately valued now in terms of traditional corporate PPAs or traditional corporate green tariff programs. So could we have green tariff programs that properly value these always-on assets, which provide all of this value to the grid and to utilities and to customers in a way that'll help them scale and get more of these offtake contracts. And then lastly, how do we pool our resources together? How do we work together? I mean, to date, a lot of the corporate PPA work has been individual companies signing massive amounts of PPAs. I mean, Michelle, what are you guys at, 19 gigawatts? I mean, that's incredible. We're at past 10. But how do we work together? An analogous situation is Google's part of something called Frontier Climate, which is an advanced market commitment where we've gotten together with other companies and basically said, if you build it, we will buy it. And we're pooling our buying power to really try and get more of the carbon removal technologies to scale, but there's no reason why those kinds of models can't work in this space. But we do know that we're going to need to give help to these technologies to get to scale faster. That's not going to happen just by itself on its own. Even though the DOE has provided incredible incentives, and I think it's given a lot of momentum now towards deployment of these technologies, but we still have some of these other pieces, particularly around offtake, that we're going to need to get in place.
Interesting. And the bit that I just like you to just say a little bit more on is this idea of valuing it through corporate PPAs. What needs to change to make these kind of peaker technologies get more valued? Is it corporates need to change their attitude, or is there a regulatory answer to it?
It's both, and it's actually 3. It's corporate off-takers, it's utilities, and it's regulators. But again, a 10 megawatt always-on technology is much different than a 30 megawatt solar project because of the value that it provides from that always-on and filling in the gaps that are caused by variable wind and solar, and doing so in a way that goes well beyond what lithium-ion storage can do. So I would say it's all of the above in terms of who needs to recognize the value. And it's we've been doing some work here with the Regulatory Assistance Project and talking with regulators about how we can actually do that. But it's very promising, this notion of creating what we call clean transition tariffs that would include a portfolio mix of wind and solar and storage and some of these always-on assets that are properly valued.
Great. Well, it'd be good maybe to get your take on that in a moment, Avi. But before we do that, Michelle, I wondered if you could say a little bit more about some of the technologies that you think are most interesting. Obviously, we've heard about the fantastic progress on geothermal, but I think you're exploring other technologies as well.
Yes, and I want to build on what Michael was saying, is that, over the last 15 years, right, it's taught us a number of lessons. One is that it's really not about our companies, right? Like, if only our companies succeed at this, then we haven't really succeeded. It's about being able to procure and really advance these technologies so that it scales for others and that it can be replicable. The second is the power of the demand signal, right? And being able to, you heard that on the renewable side and obviously on the geothermal side. Recently, earlier this year, Microsoft signed a purchasing power PPA for fusion. For I think the first ever corporate agreement for fusion, 50 megawatts, to be delivered and developed in the United States. And that's the justification behind that, is to show that there's a demand for these technologies if they can kind of be developed. So that is another kind of lesson, and the third is just the importance and the power of coupling. And I think that Tim was talking about it when the great work that they're doing with Google, of like the importance of coupling procurement with investment and policy. We've seen the same thing happen in other spaces, in these other new technologies, in the carbon removal market, and being able to show the demand signal for durable carbon removal, direct air capture, being able to then also invest in some of these first stage commercial projects and getting them to scale so that we can then procure more. The same thing happens with sustainable aviation fuels. And so how do we bring that to other technologies?
Great, thanks, Michelle. And I think, Tim, you gave quite a compelling story about how that kind of early stage demand, voluntary demand from corporates, can help kickstart technologies and start bringing them down learning curves. But what do you really need to scale? Like, what's the long-term policy answer for you to get to kind of scale? We've got Avi here to meet your every demand, so why don't you make them now?
Well, there's a lot of things that we can do, and I'll speak about geothermal because obviously that's what I know. But this is sort of a roadmap for every technology to scale. I mean, we've already talked about advanced market commitments. I mean, that's so huge, and I don't think we would be seeing the carbon removal market taking off right now had it not been for private companies stepping up and doing the advanced market commitments. So just sending a clear signal that we know this is what the world needs, and we're gonna be willing to pay for it is huge. Just like y'all did with fusion as well. And then it's also, I think you can see this pathway where a lot of times the corporates can lead and create more innovative structures or send that market signal, and you can see it follow through into policies. Like, I don't think it's an accident that we saw a cascading wave of 100% carbon-free electricity targets passed in the state level in the United States after Google and other corporates sort of set the standard on 24/7 carbon-free energy. So I think there's a huge interplay there. I also think that from the DOE level, it's one of my ambitions, and Avi's great list of hubs and demo things. We don't quite have geothermal in there yet, so we're continuing to advocate for more parity when it comes to geothermal funding at the federal level.
There it is, Avi. There's the
there's the ask. Congress. So we're asking Congress as well. So of course funding for these things, because getting down a learning curve, the most powerful point in my opinion of where public investment dollars can be spent is getting you down that steep part of the learning curve the fastest, and that's a place where geothermal and a lot of technologies are right now. So it's certainly the time to invest. And then probably the final thing that I'll say that we absolutely have to have, especially in the United States right now, is we've got to fix the grid. I think what we're seeing right now is unprecedented demand from the electricity sector, where we got into an interesting period where over the last 20 years in the United States, electricity demand has been relatively flat. And I think it created a market where everybody got used to the new rules of 2 decades of relatively flat growth. Now, what we've had in the last few years is these companies have put data centers online. And then these companies, Microsoft and Google and others, then rolled out innovative AI tools where we now know that those data centers are going to need to grow dramatically faster in demand. And we have electric vehicles and we have hydrogen. All these things are coming online. We know we need to meet it with clean, firm power, but we're still looking at interconnection queue timelines that extend several years. We're still looking at transmission projects that require, I think the most recent one that a lot of folks celebrated in the Western United States was a 17-year permitting process. And those timelines just are not compatible with driving the new technology solutions we need to market. So there's a lot that can be done on voluntary corporate commitments, a lot that can be done in the interplay of corporates leading, showing where policy can go and what's possible. And then we need to drive that forward to fixing the grid so that we can electrify what we need to and get the demand there to make it happen. And all of that comes down to building a robust and stronger electric grid.
Great. Well, Avi, I can't ask you to fix the US grid. I mean, that seems to be beyond most people. But maybe you could tell us a little bit about, what you see the kind of direction of travel is for policy for enabling these technologies beyond just the kind of early stage support for getting them down cost curves.
Sure. Well, a couple thoughts. One, in terms of corporate commitments or market demand, I mean, I just couldn't agree more with the opportunity there. Federal policy and state policy, can do a lot to bring down the cost of new technologies. But ultimately, if you're going to this is going to be a private sector investment-led clean energy transition, right? Like the government is, at least in the United States, is putting a lot of money into the clean energy transition, but the amount of scale is going to require, substantially more from the private sector, and we can help catalyze that. But in order to do that, we need to have lower cost clean energy and also demand for clean energy. And so, what you'll see in some of the liftoff reports that we've talked about is the long-term demand signal is one of the major challenges for some of these technologies. And so we're thinking about policy opportunities there. For hydrogen, we are looking to deploy about $1 billion of the $7 billion program to a sort of a long-term demand signal program where we can sort of provide some long-term demand signal to create certainty, and hopefully that will help development. But companies like Google, Microsoft, and others being able to do that, I think, is also really important. I couldn't also agree more with Tim about the grid, and we are, while the Department of Energy can't fix the U.S. grid on its own, certainly, we are certainly doing a lot of thinking about how to improve the situation. And the average interconnection time for new generation is bordering on 5 years now. That's like not going to work for the type of transition and the speed and scale of transition that we need. And so, really trying to tackle that. Federal government's deploying some tools that it can in terms of changing our regulatory policy, et cetera. The Department of Energy has about roughly $12 billion of money from the Infrastructure Bill Inflation Reduction Act to help catalyze new transmission investment, which is a drop in the bucket for the scale of transmission that we will need in the United States, but still is intended to help catalyze additional private sector investment. So I think those are some areas of focus, certainly, that we're going to see. And then on the permitting side, that's definitely something that we've been paying a lot of attention to. The Department of Energy has put out, along with our interagency partners, a plan to coordinate the federal permitting of transmission and try and get that permitting time down to about 2 years. There's actually a longstanding law that passed in 2005 that's never been fully implemented, in which the Department of Energy is to set schedules for federal permitting of transmission and work with our interagency partners in the Department of Interior, the Forest Service, et cetera, to try and to get those permitting times down. And we have really a great commitment across the interagency and the federal government in the U.S. to actually do that. And so that's a big commitment to try and drive those times down from 17 years to 2. Not all of them are 17 years, to be fair. That's a particularly bad example, but still, it really needs to be a focus. And so that's something we're paying a lot of attention to.
Great, thanks. And I think anybody that focuses on permitting in the US can always make themselves feel better if they talk to a European power producer. So things can always be worse. But a sort of question to everyone in a way now, you talked, Tim, about the big, sort of targets that the state level, in the US. And I just kind of wonder, you're at the frontier of these technologies. What's the prospects of us getting these technologies down the cost curve and up the deployment curve at the kind of pace we need to meet those kind of state targets? Are we? Because I think you see a lot of people who are the sort of transition skeptics saying, "Oh, we'll never meet this. We can't, phase out the gas and the coal, to meet these targets." What are your perspectives on that? Are we likely to see the kind of technologies coming to scale at the pace we need? I don't know who wants to take that.
Yes.
And it's all going to be geothermal.
It's all going to be geothermal. It's solved. Of course, it's going to take a broad cross-section of technologies, but it is interesting. I think the systematic building of this innovation ecosystem that, in a lot of ways, didn't exist. Maybe before the Paris COP, where there was a lot of momentum around new innovation and deployment and getting things to market. That was 2015, and there was a recognition there that I think that investment dollars into new innovative solutions for addressing climate change had really dried up, and that if we were going to hit any of these targets, we needed that to come back with a vengeance. And I think one of the things that's missed out a little bit on what we call clean tech 2.0 and this wave is that all of the setbacks and shortcomings of that clean tech 1.0 wave, the leaders that learned those lessons were the people who have designed this new one with clean tech 2.0. And so it's a much more holistic thing where you're looking across early stage venture capital, policy, deployment dollars, customer commitments. This wasn't a set up ecosystem the way that it was back then. And so I think that we're seeing a pace of change right now that's unlike anything that we've seen before in terms of scaling climate technologies. And it's very encouraging. And just to use a very concrete example, if you were to look at things like the Department of Energy report on commercialization timeline for enhanced geothermal systems, the most recent one I saw was laying out a roadmap to create a commercial EGS project by 2035. And we, of course, did that in 2023. So that's an area where we're already 12 years ahead of the innovation timeline because this ecosystem came together to support much more rapid technology deployment in geothermal than any of the experts had forecasted. And I think we're going to see that across a whole host of technologies in the coming years.
Wow, it's very exciting. Michael?
Yeah, I would just add, I echo everything Tim said. And, look, all you have to do is look at wind, solar, lithium-ion storage, and EVs. It's absolutely possible. We've talked about policy and the grid. I want to talk for a second about voluntary signals. I think that's also incredibly important to getting these technologies down the scale as well. There's a lot of, especially being here at COP, conversations around driving voluntary corporate action. And there are a number of drivers for that, like the Greenhouse Gas Protocol or SBTI or other leadership standards. And I think it's incredibly important for us to continue to evolve those signals so they're directing corporate investment in the most impactful way possible. That was one of the reasons that motivated us to set our goal around 24/7 carbon-free energy. It wasn't just about us. What we were seeing was that there was this saturation of corporate PPAs in a small number of electric power grids, or there was this purchasing of unbundled renewable energy certificates, which really weren't displacing fossil. And all of this incredible corporate investment, 150 gigawatts of corporate PPAs in the past 15 years, was not being channeled as effectively as possible. And so that was a motivation for us in setting the 24/7 carbon-free energy goal and writing our paper. And Tim, I'll take a cut on the equity for use of the paper, by the way. And so I think it's really important that we get these voluntary signals right, because they drive an enormous amount of action and investment by companies. And so we need to look at the protocol. We need to continue to involve corporate accounting standards. We need to continue to evolve corporate leadership standards for climate and make sure that they are driving the most impactful investment possible. And we weren't even looking at these technologies before we set our 24/7 carbon-free energy goal, and sort of setting that goal, which was really the ultimate destination that we're all trying to reach, like I said before, was really impactful in terms of changing the way we thought about how we do all this. And we also had a number of innovations on the demand side, like shifting power loads and more real-time monitoring, using AI to manage our variable assets that we wouldn't have done if it wasn't for getting those signals right. So I think that's another important element here that will help to drive more demand for these technologies.
Great. Michelle?
I really appreciate the raising of the both state level targets, but also the country targets, because in the end, that's what this is about. This is about hitting net zero for these countries, for these economies, and in some ways, those targets seem a long ways away, and that gives us runway to be able to bring these new technologies instead of looking at a 2025 or a 2030 target. And the other piece of optimism is that, I'm just struck one day at COP, just the types of conversations that are happening right now are very different than the COPs that I've been at, just that we're talking about very different types of technologies, and people feel comfortable talking about those technologies because there are pathways to begin to get there. There are playbooks that we can use. So yesterday, at the Climate Innovation Forum, there were a number of different startups that were talking about the technology and how they might have developed it 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and now all of a sudden have, several plants, if it's green cement or sustainable aviation fuel. So I think that that's the same kind of ingenuity and innovation we need here, but setting this on to the North Star of these climate targets.
Great, thanks. I'm going to come to the audience in one moment, but I've got a sort of final question from me, really, which is, what I've kind of heard today is there's sort of three big things that I think any corporate can do to help drive the transition in the power sector. One is the sort of 24/7 procurement, being really thoughtful about how you procure. I've heard the kind of support for early stage commercialization of the new technologies, and then of course the policy advocacy. Those are three big things I think that any corporate can do. But what I'd like to hear about a little bit maybe from Google and Microsoft is what about the tech companies? AI, big data. Like how can you use these tools specifically to advance the energy transition? Is there anything exciting that you can tell us? I think you mentioned about how you're using AI to switch things on and off, but it'd be great to hear more.
I'm happy to give a couple of examples, and I'll preface it by saying we're just at the very, very beginning here of realizing the capability. But I'll give an example from the demand side and from the generation side. From the generation side, again, it's all about getting access to large amounts of data. And as we continued to sign corporate PPAs, we started gathering large amounts of data from the grids where we operated, because we needed that for 24/7. We were data on the production of the facilities which we had PPAs with, and combining that with weather and other data, we were able to look across our wind portfolio and actually optimize how that portfolio was managed on a day-ahead and real-time basis. So when projects sell power into the grids, they tend to get more revenue if they can reserve their place in line a day ahead, which is very easy for fossil generation to do because it's more predictable, but it's a lot harder for variable assets like wind to do. Using AI, we were able to predict the production of our wind farms 36 hours in advance and actually bid those in with confidence day ahead. And now we're doing that for over 2 gigawatts of our wind portfolio, and it's essentially increased the value of those assets and enabled them to be more predictable and valuable to those who operate the grid. And then the second example on the demand side is using that same grid data that we've been getting, the real-time data on the carbon mix of the grid, and actually getting day-ahead forecasts of that as well. We are actually using that to develop optimization for how we can shift our electricity loads at data centers, both in time and in space, to align with the times of day when the power grids are the cleanest. And so we're now doing that across our fleet globally, and that's something, again, that wouldn't be possible were it not for the capabilities that AI has brought to the table.
That's amazing. And two technologies that really could be widely deployed, actually, beyond Google. So I hope that's something that's in train. But Michelle?
Yes. One, as I mentioned before, is one of our SIF portfolio companies that's using artificial intelligence to really understand what's happening on the transmission lines. Where are there efficiency losses? Where are there gaps? How can you reroute in order to be able to increase the load and the transfer across transmission? That's with Line Vision. And another exciting partnership is with TerraPraxis on looking at 240 coal sites around the world of closed coal plants, and how you can repurpose them for advanced nuclear deployment, if that's those sites are, if that's what's decided, but how you can do that instead of doing every single individual plant by itself or any individual site, understanding kind of what is going on in the particular site, and then being able to quickly replicate that and have a more efficient way to be able to do permitting. So.
Great, thanks. All right, let's open
Can
it
I
up.
say something about that one?
Oh
actually?
yeah, please do.
Obviously, most of the AI conversation is appropriately at the corporate level, where a lot of the AI tools are being developed. But the Department of Energy has some of the world's most advanced supercomputers, and we are doing a lot of thinking about AI too. And the president issued an executive order about AI recently. I think it might be the longest executive order in history, something like 150 pages. A lot of that is about making sure that we're being responsible about potential risk for AI, and that's obviously extremely important. And we at the Department of Energy have a role there. We're related to biotechnology and nuclear technology. But there's some really interesting opportunities called out in the executive order as well that I just wanted to flag, because I think AI has some interesting potential on the policy side too. So two that are flagged for DOE to work on with the interagency are to think about how AI can be helpful in speeding up the permitting process. A lot of the environmental reviews and permitting processes are, things that happen sort of regularly and repeated, but people spend a lot of money coming up with new, long environmental reports, which are important for policymakers to understand the consequences of their decisions, but some real potential for AI to speed up the permitting process. And then we talked a little bit about interconnection. I mean, that's another area where, I think the grid operators, there's a lot of opportunity for using more advanced technology solutions to speed up the interconnection process. A lot of that 5 years that it's taking to interconnect the grid are literally the engineering studies it takes to evaluate what happens when you're going to connect large new generation to the system because of the complexity of the grid. And so being able to use more advanced technology tools to speed that up is something that we're excited about and looking into. And I know actually some of the folks on the stage have some interesting technology solutions there too. But I think that's a real opportunity as well.
Great. Hearing DOE's supercomputers are going to be tackling the interconnection queues. Question here at the front, please. Maybe, I don't know if there's any other questions. We'll maybe take a couple and then go ahead, please. And could you say who you are, first of all, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for all of your insights. I'm Meera. I am from Duke. I'm an observer here in the Blue Zone, and I'm doing my master's in environmental management with a focus in energy. So it's great hearing this huge amount of optimism from all of you. My question is, I've learned that the grid in most parts of the world is not really built for wind and solar, with a lot of issues with spinning generation, and we need a lot more technology now to optimize our grid for wind and solar. So what I'm seeing is wind and solar is shooting up, and especially in US, at a rate that the grid is not really catching up. So are we looking at some? Are we, if they don't happen at the same rate, if we don't build a grid that's optimized for wind and solar, are we looking at some intermittency and energy security challenges? Or is that something that's being taken care of?
Okay, a great question. And let's have another question here.
Hi, I'm Ina. I'm also studying energy environment at Duke University. My question is, using virtual PPA or PPA as a vehicle to achieve the climate goal. Of course, that's one of. Sorry, just to reframe my question. Virtual PPA and VPA is like a vehicle to achieve climate goal. However, in some of the country, they do not have enough generation or enough renewable project in the pipeline. I wonder, as a corporate, how could you send that information to the national level to, maybe bring more projects to the grids?
Two great questions from Duke University here. So I don't know who wants to take them. So we've got a question on kind of what we're going to do about the grid, And then, what are we going to do to support early stage deployment in emerging economies?
I'll take the grid question. It's a great question, and you're absolutely right. The generation technologies are racing forward, and the grid hasn't necessarily caught up in the U.S. and other places. I would say two things that need to happen. One is we need to have better information about how the power flows and the grids themselves operate. There's a website called electricitymaps.org where you can go and actually see the real-time power mix and generation in certain grids around the world, but not all. And that kind of information is really not readily available, especially in emerging markets. The grids are very opaque and there's lack of access to data. But what can you do when you get that data? Let me tell you. There's a project that's happening now that's developed by X, which is the R&D arm of Alphabet, that's looking at how to take data like this and sort of simulate the grid and basically do in a way that would help to dramatically improve interconnection times, because you would be able to run the studies and understand the grid dynamics in a much faster way, in a much clearer way than you can now. And so I think this combination of making information available and then applying new tools to use that information to make grids, to manage grids better is an opportunity for us. Obviously, that's not. We still need to invest in the grid. We need to build out the grid. We have our transmission build out both in the U.S. and everywhere has not caught up with generation, and that's obviously another important piece too.
Thanks.
Can I jump in on that one too? Completely agree with everything Michael said. In addition, there are important technical and technology solutions for ensuring that variable intermittent resources are able to at high degrees of penetration are able to that the grid is able to continue to function as needed. And I think back in, I want to say 2009 or 2010, the Department of Energy had a report about we think we could get to something like 20% wind on the grid before you started having certain reliability issues, and we've blown past that. So I think, particularly in sort of, if you're talking about short-term grid stability, there have been times in SPP and other places where it's been virtually 100% of the generation on the grid. So I think the challenge is potentially not as large as it may have seemed before. At the same time, having inverter-based resources and other technology solutions that are able to provide some of the grid stability and the inertia and some of these sort of key reliability services that spitting generation has historically provided. There's technology that is funded by the Department of Energy and others to have those technical solutions that would go along with deployment. And we've talked mostly about geothermal and nuclear, et cetera, but I think some of these advanced grid solutions are also technologies that are going to need to be deployed as well.
Great, thank you. Michelle, go.
I was going to focus on the second question, and I know the conversation today is really concentrated a lot on the United States, but both Microsoft and Google and many other companies were operating around the world, and we're looking to expand carbon-free and to power our generation, power our supply, right, power our consumption with carbon-free sources. And so, and as you said, not every country where we operate has those types of options. So they involve talking to the governments, talking to our utilities, showing that there is this this demand, and then working to figure out how do we bring those renewable or other carbon-free sources online.
Go ahead, Tim.
Well, you brought up transmission, so I feel like I got to jump in again. And thank you so much for bringing the international community beyond the U.S. in, because obviously we're a U.S.-based company, so we talked about the grid issues there, but it's something that's happening throughout the world. And I think one of the things to point out, I know we're talking a lot about corporate action here, but there's also an individual advocacy component of this. I don't think that people quite realize that transmission build-out and improving the infrastructure of the grid is synonymous with climate action until very recently. And I don't think that's a message that has really sunk in across the advocacy community. And I think that that's a lot of it, is that realizing that when you advocate for climate policy, advocating for a more robust electric grid and more transmission is actually a massive part of that. I think is a really important thing. And I got to make a plug, since I'm a geothermal company. we spin a turbine, so we provide inertia. So that's one of the great ways that you could provide those grid services, even on and grids all over the world. So
we all need to go geothermal. But as a former official from the IEA and also European, I have to say that I think renewables are a tremendous answer to energy security as well. You know, I mean, if you look at the pace of growth in Latin America, you know, the fact that they've got such high renewables has made them, you know, quite energy independent in many ways. But let's go to other questions from the audience. I think have we got time for more? Yes, I think we've got time for another round.
I have one.
Go on, Devon.
Yeah.
Kate looks like she's got a sort of almost a...
Okay, I'll do faster and it's okay. My question is for Tim and maybe also Google and Microsoft around policy and advocacy. It seems like there is not yet a sort of large constituency pushing for a lot of the policies that would be helpful for companies like Fervo and other advanced clean electricity technologies, even as the sort of broader renewables industry has, you know, grown in size and had much more clout politically from a sort of policy and advocacy perspective. So I'm curious if you have any reflections about sort of the role that companies like Google, Microsoft could play, or what needs to happen to have technologies like yours have a bigger seat at the table on policy issues.
Let Kate go first. Want to answer that one? Yeah, well, no, we'll do two at a time.
Okay. So first, I just wanted to note my appreciation that we're having this conversation, right? And this conversation can live alongside conversations about tripling renewables.
And Kate, do you want to just say where you're from?
Oh, yes. Yes, I work with Katherine at Bain & Company. Thanks, Katherine. So I think that we're now at a point in time when we are in an all-of-the-above conversation for the first time. And I think that a number of different policies have really enabled that to happen, including the Inflation Reduction Act, which is really exciting to see that some of these incentives being expanded beyond renewables. I guess my question is sort of related to Devon's question, and it's a little bit of like, what's the best way to do the dance here, right? Is it demand-side commitments, then stimulate and attract interest from policymakers and like, oh, this is a thing that we could support? Then do you sort of take that to the policymakers, you take it to the utilities? Like, what would be your advice on how you would actually operationalize getting this ultimately supported by policy at, just take the US example, at a state and a federal level, or in other countries, right, as a really great opportunity to attract investment to their geographies?
Two great questions there. So who'd like to go first? Avi's signaling that he doesn't want it. So Michael or Tim?
I'll tackle, since he called me out by name, I'll tackle Devon's policy question. And it's an important point, and I think one thing to talk about, we, like a lot of new clean energy technologies, started out as a couple of researchers in a lab. And the thing is, you go from the idea phase to electrons on the grid, there's a lot you have to do there on the policy side. And I think one of the things that's always very daunting for a startup is, you know, for us to be able to do that successfully, we had to have policy and regulatory relationships in the counties we worked in, the cities we worked in, the states we worked in. Federal policy made a huge difference in it. And you think about going from a couple of researchers in a lab to like maintaining policy and regulatory relationships with 30 different entities at the state, federal, and local level to do project development. Most startups are not going to be able to staff up 30 separate policy and regulatory people overnight, but a lot of times the corporates that you're partnering with have that capability. And so it's like when you enter into a new state, when you go to no local county, it's always incredible to find out that, like, well, actually, you know, Google's been around for the last 13 years and has advocated in front of this Public Utility Commission before. So it like makes a big difference there when you find that. So that kind of thing, it's not just about finding the right policies to advocate for. It's the fact that you have to have such a large sort of horsepower in getting the right policy and regulatory things done that it's an enormous area for corporates to play. You know, it's not a lot of the blocking and tackling of getting electrons on the grid is not crafting the perfect wording for the perfect policy. It's about having the resources to work up and down the federal, state, local stakeholders to actually make sure you're driving those projects forward in the right way.
And are there enough corporates doing this, or are we sort of sat among them today?
not even close. And back to the policy question, there are 23,000 companies who submit their corporate greenhouse gas footprints to CDP. There are over 1,000 companies who've set science-based targets. And but there needs to be a stampede of companies demanding access to clean energy technologies, both wind and solar and these new technologies, and demanding for the policy solutions to actually get these technologies onto the grid faster. And I feel like we haven't even scratched the surface yet of creating that kind of demand and creating that kind of policy action that can come from that demand. Kate, I don't know what the order is, but I think if you had a demand at that level and policy engagement at that level, things would be dramatically different, and we'd see a lot of these problems getting solved faster than they are. But here we are at a climate leadership conference, and I still don't think that there's enough expectation on what companies should be doing when it comes to policy and how important that is to solving climate change and how important that is to driving the energy transition that we all want to see happen. And I would like for that to be a much greater expectation and see companies engage in it much more. I think there's a lot of value in it, and Michelle and Microsoft, they engage heavily in this space. We do as well, and there's incredible value associated with it. But we need many more coming to the table, not just a smaller number of companies.
Great point. Michelle?
And it's a challenge because not all companies obviously are as big as Google or Microsoft. Many of them don't have robust government affairs, and if they do, they're not just focused on this particular issue. So helping to build coalitions and making it easier for them to plug in. I think in our experience, we found it's both the demand signal and showing that there is demand there to unlock it if these policies, but also the expertise, having worked on some of the first projects and showing, okay, here's what worked, or here's actually where the big obstacle is. And so we've seen that to date. I think that was also part of the one of the conversations that happened during the IRA on the tech neutral tax credit, and having companies come in and showing both the demand for it as well as where that the hiccup was. And we've seen this, on our early stage work on carbon removal in our first few projects, and going back to different governments and saying, hey, look, here's where the hang up is, or here's how we would approach developing standards based on what we're seeing.
Great. So I think we're almost at time. So maybe I just give one final word to everybody before we close of just kind of what you'd like to see for the 2024 on this space. Maybe just a sentence or two, because we should close on reasonable time. No one's quite sure what they're going to say, and I've just sprung that question on them. But let me start with you, Tim, because I feel like the answer could be geothermal.
Well, you said it, not me. I'm glad y'all heard it from the expert here. That's the answer.
Great. So, anything from 2024? Hopes, dreams, expectations?
I have 3. Continue to expand our solar wind. The second is to take the first of a kind projects and make them nth of a kind, right? To continue to scale what is kind of in the pipeline, but get them deployed faster. And for some of these additional technologies, leaning in and figuring out what we have to do with policy, with procurement to get some of the first of a kind done.
I like what Michelle said, so
Okay.
yes, and that one.
More money from the DOE.
I'll just say that our goal is a 2030 goal, so our hope is to see more of these technologies pilot and get to commercial scale in that time frame. And I think what's so exciting is even if a couple of these technologies scale into what we think the potential could be in the hundreds of gigawatts, it will be absolutely game-changing for the global energy system, and that's something that we're super excited to play a part in.
Great. Well, I'd like to thank you all for taking part in this panel, but more than that, to thank you for the tremendous leadership that you show in this space, because I think you're doing things that are really important for the entire sector and not just for your own institutions. So fantastic job. Thank you all, and thank you for joining. Thanks.